The plane no one wanted. Background music, slow cinematic strings, distant engine hum. Narrator, deep tone. They called it a failure before it even flew. The British laughed, the Americans doubted. And even its own engineers had little faith. The P-51 Mustang, a fighter, born out of desperation, was once mocked as America's worst warplane. But fate, as always, had other plans. It was the spring of 1940, and Europe was burning. Hitler's Luftwaffe dominated the skies over France, Poland, and soon the rest of Europe. Britain stood alone, battered, bleeding, and desperate for fighters. Their Spitfires and Hurricanes were fast, but their factories were exhausted. The British government sent a message across the Atlantic. Can America help? But America at that time wasn't ready for war. The U.S. Army Air Corps was small, underfunded, and still using outdated designs like the P-40 Warhawk. The best American aircraft companies were already overloaded. So when the British approached North American Aviation NLA, a relatively new company, they didn't expect much. The British wanted NLA to build Curtiss P-40s under license. But the president of NLA, James Dutch Kindleberger, made a bold promise. Give us 120 days, and we'll design you a brand new fighter, better than the P-40. The British were skeptical. A new fighter in just 4 months? Impossible. But they had no choice. So they agreed. And in a small California factory, under the glare of wartime urgency, a miracle began to take shape. Sound cue, hammering, engines, papers flipping. The engineers worked day and night. No breaks, no holidays. The design they created wasn't just new. It was revolutionary. It used laminar flow wings, a shape that reduced drag and allowed incredible speed. Its body was sleek and elegant, built for performance, not beauty. By September 1940, barely 117 days later, the first prototype, the NA-73X, rolled out. The world's newest fighter was ready to fly. But when it finally took off, the truth hit hard. The Mustang looked good, but it wasn't great. Its Allison engine couldn't perform well at high altitudes. Above 15,000 feet, it lost power. In a world where dogfights happened in the clouds, that was a death sentence. British test pilots were disappointed. They said, "It handles well, but it's no Spitfire." The RAF accepted a few Mustangs, mostly for low-altitude reconnaissance and ground attacks, but no one saw it as a real fighter. In the skies over Europe, it was a joke. A second-rate plane from a country that didn't even want to fight. For America, it was an embarrassment. For Britain, a temporary fix. And for history, it was just the beginning. By 1942, the Mustang had already been dismissed. Good for ground support. Useless at high altitudes. A dead end, or so everyone thought. But across the Atlantic, a group of British engineers refused to give up. They believed the Mustang's design was too advanced to be wasted. It just needed a better engine. That engine came from Rolls-Royce. The legendary Merlin, the same heart that powered the Spitfire and Hurricane. In the summer of 1942, Rolls-Royce engineers quietly began an experiment. They removed the Allison engine from a Mustang MKI and installed the Merlin. What happened next changed aviation forever. The test pilot took off. The plane climbed, higher, higher. 20,000 feet, 25,000, 30,000 feet. No power loss, no stalling. Just pure speed and grace. The combination was perfect. The American airframe and the British engine became one. It was faster, deadlier, and more efficient than anything in the sky. The pilots and their machine. Background music, emotional piano with faint radio beeps. The P-51 Mustang became the dream of every pilot. They called it the Cadillac of the sky. It could climb, dive, and roll with perfect balance. Ace pilot Chuck Yeager said, "It could do anything you asked, and forgive everything you did wrong." The cockpit visibility was unmatched. The handling at high speed was flawless, and its long range meant one thing: survival. American bomber crews began to notice something miraculous. The more Mustangs that flew with them, the fewer bombers were lost. Pilots like George Preddy, Don Gentile, and Bud Anderson became legends in the air, shooting down dozens of enemy aircraft. They painted their Mustangs with names, faces, and hearts. These planes weren't machines anymore. They were partners. Brothers. The Mustang gave pilots hope. And in turn, the pilots gave the Mustang immortality. The new version was named P-51B Mustang, and when the RAF tested it, the reaction was pure disbelief. "Gentlemen, this is the best fighter in the world." The joke had ended. The legend had just begun. The war over Europe. Background, drums of war, roaring engines, radio chatter. By 1943, the Allies had a serious problem. Their bombers, B-17, flying fortresses, and B-24, liberators, were being slaughtered over Germany. The Luftwaffe ruled the skies once again. The Americans tried escorting bombers with P-47, Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, but none could go the full distance to Berlin and back. The bombers were alone, and alone they died. Then came the P-51 Mustang with its massive range. Thanks to its efficient aerodynamics and drop tanks, it could escort bombers deep into enemy territory and all the way to Berlin. When the Mustangs arrived, the air war changed overnight. Radio transmission. Little friends are here. Repeat, little friends are here. That phrase, little friends, became the sweetest sound for every bomber crew in Europe. The Mustangs didn't just protect bombers. They hunted the hunters. Luftwaffe pilots soon realized the skies no longer belonged to them. From America's worst fighter to the savior of Europe, the transformation was complete. But for the men who flew it, the Mustang was more than a machine. It was life itself, the pilots and their machine. Background music, emotional piano with faint radio beeps. The P-51 Mustang became the dream of every pilot. They called it the Cadillac of the sky. It could climb, dive, and roll with perfect balance. Ace pilot Chuck Yeager said, "It could do anything you asked, and forgive everything you did wrong." The cockpit visibility was unmatched. The handling at high speed was flawless, and its long range meant one thing: survival. American bomber crews began to notice something miraculous. The more Mustangs that flew with them, the fewer bombers were lost. Pilots like George Preddy, Don Gentile, and Bud Anderson became legends in the air, shooting down dozens of enemy aircraft. They painted their Mustangs with names, faces, and hearts. These planes weren't machines anymore. They were partners, brothers. The Mustang gave pilots hope, and in turn the pilots gave the Mustang immortality. By early 1944, the tide of war was turning. Mustangs escorted every major bombing raid, from France to Berlin. Hitler's once invincible Luftwaffe was collapsing under the relentless assault. German pilots and veterans of years of war faced a new kind of enemy, one that could outclimb, outdive, and outfight them at every turn. The Luftwaffe commander, Hermann Göring, once said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." Every day, more German planes burned in the sky. The once proud Air Force of the Reich had met its match. Not from a superweapon, but from a plane they once mocked. The Mustang didn't just win battles, it broke the enemy's spirit. Narrator, calmly. From failure to fear, the P-51 had become the symbol of American air power, but its true test was still ahead. D-Day and beyond. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Over 150,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. But before a single soldier touched the sand, the skies had to be cleared. Mustangs swept across France and Belgium, destroying railways, fuel depots, and enemy airfields. They strafed German convoys, silenced anti-aircraft guns, and ensured that when the invasion began, the skies belonged to the Allies. Pilots flew for hours without rest, guarding the bombers, attacking supply lines, and engaging in brutal dogfights against the desperate remains of the Luftwaffe. By the end of 1944, air superiority was complete. Germany's air force was shattered, and the road to victory lay open. The same plane the world once laughed at had now become the sword that cut through tyranny. But for the pilots who survived, the memory of that sleek silver fighter would never fade. The long road to Tokyo. By 1945, the war in Europe was nearly over. Hitler's empire was crumbling, but across the Pacific, another empire was still fighting: Japan. The U.S. Navy and Air Force faced brutal resistance. The skies over the Pacific were vast, humid, and deadly. Distances stretched for thousands of miles, far beyond what most fighters could handle. Then came the Mustang, once again proving its worth. The new version, the P-51D, Mustang, was ready for the Pacific theater. It had a bubble canopy for full visibility, 650 caliber machine guns, and long-range drop tanks. It could now fly over 1,600 miles on a single mission. From Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Mustangs began escorting the mighty B-29 superfortresses as they bombed the Japanese mainland. For the first time, American bombers reached Tokyo and came back alive. Radio chatter. Red leader to base. Mustangs are with the forts. Tokyo is in sight. The P-51 wasn't just fighting anymore. It was rewriting the very concept of air dominance. The plane that began as a British request was now ending the war on the other side of the world. From London to Berlin, from Iwo Jima to Tokyo, the Mustang's shadow stretched across every battlefield. The end of the war. Background, gentle strings, static, distant explosions fading. By mid-1945, Japan was on its knees. The skies belonged entirely to the Allies. Mustangs roamed freely, destroying railroads, ships, and airfields. When the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world stood in stunned silence. The war, the deadliest in human history, was finally ending. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, Japan formally surrendered. In the skies above Tokyo Bay, P-51 Mustangs flew in perfect formation. A silver salute to victory. It was over. But for those who built, flew, and trusted this machine, it was more than victory. It was vindication. The worst fighter in America had ended up shaping the very meaning of freedom in flight. The legacy lives on. When the guns fell silent, most of the world moved on. But the P-51 Mustang refused to fade away. It became a symbol of innovation, resilience, and teamwork. For the next decade, Mustangs continued to serve in air forces around the world, from Korea to Israel, from South America to Africa. When the Korean War began in 1950, jets like the F-86 Sabre took center stage. But the Mustang, now renamed the F-51, returned once more, this time as a ground attack aircraft. Even in the jet age, the old Mustang still had fight left in it. Pilots who flew both said the same thing. The Mustang feels alive, like it wants to fly. The P-51 story became a legend not because of technology alone, but because of the spirit it carried. The belief that even the most underestimated can rise above all. From mockery to mastery, from rejection to reverence, the Mustang's journey mirrored America's own. From scrap to immortality. After the war, thousands of Mustangs were sold, scrapped, or left to rust in forgotten hangars. But some, the lucky few, were bought by collectors, racers, and dreamers. They painted them bright silver, polished the wings, and took them to the skies once more, not for war, but for glory. Air shows, museums, films. The Mustang became a flying memory of courage. Its deep-throated roar still echoes across airfields, reminding generations of what it took to earn freedom. Every time a P-51 takes off, it carries with it the whispers of history, the laughter of doubters, the prayers of pilots, and the spirit of a nation that refused to give up. They laughed at America's worst fighter, but when it finally soared, the world looked up and saw greatness, the message that still echoes. The Mustang wasn't just a plane. It was proof that the power of faith, teamwork, and persistence can turn failure into legend. And somewhere, high above the clouds, when the silver wings of a Mustang glint in the sun, it's not just light reflecting. It's history shining back at the world.